Welcome everybody to the Scale Up Show. This is your host Ryan Staley, and I have a very special guest with me again, back for part two. Advait Shinde, who is the chairman at GoGuardian, actually helped grow the organization from 0 to 100 million, over 100 million in 10 years. Went all the way from founder to CEO and is now chairman. This is episode part two. So if you missed the first one, we go deep on AI for education, the impacts, the future, where it's going for your kids, where it's going for work. So if you did not listen to that, go back and check it out. Advait was dropping some fire on that episode, and I can't be more aligned with him on his viewpoint for it. So I think you'll enjoy it. Advait, welcome. Happy to have you back, man.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Let's do it.
Let's roll. Okay, so today we are going to shift gears a little bit. We are talking about AI for education and going deep on that. Today, we're going to get a little bit more on the business side because the journey that you had is highly, highly unique, not just with the company you created, the roles that you shifted in, but the value that you created to generate a $100 million plus company in 10 years, maybe less than 10 years, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. So I'm curious for my own personal take. I'm sure you, the listener, are very curious as well. So walk me through that, man. What was the journey on making that happen all the way from like, what was the proverbial apple that fell on your head that gave you the idea all the way to like, how'd you make it happen along the way? And we'll get into much deeper aspects, but love to hear that.
Great. I think the journey actually starts way back when my co-founders and I were actually in elementary, middle school. So I went to school in a public school in Southern California area. And by all accounts, it was an incredible school. Like if you looked at it from the perspective of test scores or graduation rates or whatever objective metric you might look at, it was nationally ranked. And my parents did so much to sort of get us into those schools to begin with. But if you think about it from the perspective of my actual learning experience in the classroom, many people might relate to this. It was pretty boring, honestly. I really hated the seeming arbitrariness of just cramming to get a good score on a test so that you could get good grades at the end of the quarter or year, so you could get into college. The just sort of fixation on the test and the superficiality of it, especially to the extent that as soon as the test was over, we would just sort of move on to the next thing and very, very quickly forget everything that we had crammed. And that wasn't even looked down upon. That was like the structure of how everything was optimized for it. It just all felt superficial and tragic, especially to the extent that we were actually really curious as learners. It really felt that the learning experience that we were having in the classroom was not really unleashing that curiosity. But we were actually fortunate to grow up in the early internet era. So where our classroom experiences were really unfulfilling, let's say, we turned to the internet as a way to really truly unleash our curiosity. And that resulted in, for example, I learned how to program at a relatively young age, all with like online resources, start early stage businesses online, and really get immersed in the world of entrepreneurship in a way that the K-12 structure would have never really been able to optimize for. And so fast forward to 2014.
Can I interrupt you real quick, man? Because
Sure,
like
sure.
I don't want to skip over that. So what were some of the early businesses that you jumped into or you tried to create?
Yeah, so this was back in middle school and high school days, just sort of building websites for people back in the day when you would go to like a local shop or a restaurant and you would tell them about the internet and they would say, oh, I don't really know about that. Or like, I don't really know if I want a website. For the few progressive people that were like, okay, yeah, I can do this. And I can maybe trust a high school student to do it for like $20 an hour, which at the time was like incredible. Like that's just what I spent a bunch of my high school doing.
Love that.
And so, yeah, it was an amazing, gratifying experience to just sort of be able to build whatever you can imagine and to do it for people as opposed to sort of doing this sort of standard minimum wage job that everybody was doing back in high school. So yeah, fast forward to 2014, we noticed that the first wave of school districts were starting to basically give a device or a laptop to every kid. And the intention was that the entirety of the learning experience was supposed to shift online. And so we looked at that and we got really excited because we saw ourselves in these kids that we were hoping to serve. And we figured that if we were able to sort of enable this digital transition to be seamless that we could do a few things. Firstly, we could take all of the amazing content and learning experiences that exist online and deliver them into the classroom in a way that would increase engagement, but also take the data that results from students engaging with digital learning experiences and use that information to understand how learning works and hopefully be in a position to optimize learning outcomes on the basis of learning how learning works. And so we got really excited about these ideas and talked to many school districts about them. And they said, look, this data and machine learning stuff is great, but I'm having trouble from keeping my students from playing games in class or watching Netflix at recess. And this was sort of like constant feedback, particularly from teachers who were actually really frustrated with the introduction of technology in the classroom. And we felt that out of all of the stakeholders involved, like the teachers should be the most excited about technology. And if they weren't, really all of this upside potential of driving learning outcomes with data would basically be lost. And so we decided to focus on those really early stage adoption problems of first and foremost, ensuring students are having a safe and productive learning experience with these devices. And that's where we focus all of our attention, especially because the way those problems were being solved at the time was taking enterprise network software and hardware and copy pasting that into K-12 environment. And we just felt that that was really dissatisfactory in the sense that preventing malware from spreading on a corporate network is a very, very different kind of problem from ensuring that a second grader is having a safe experience on their laptop. And so we embraced the differences of those two problems and built something really purpose-built for K-12. And the business really just exploded. So we reached $1 million in ARR in our first 8 or 9 months or so of operation. And that grew to 4 million the next year and then 11 million the next year. And it's well north of 100 million today. So it's been a crazy journey.
Love that, man. So how did you originally start your go-to-market? Like, how did you start bringing revenue in the door? It sounds like you did a great job of like understanding the pain the teachers had, but the teachers don't make the decisions when it comes to budgets for school districts, right? So how did you like effectively execute that and then get that rolling? And then how did that build over time?
You know, we had no idea how to run a go-to-market in K-12 because we had no experience in K-12. So we didn't know how budgets worked. We didn't know how procurement worked, how folks make decisions on how to spend money. But what we did know was that there was a real problem that needed to be solved. To the extent that more and more of these workflows were shifting online, more and more time was being spent on these devices compared to, let's say, the computer lab era of before. To the extent that that experience online was suboptimal or distracting or even harmful, the stakes were basically just getting higher and higher and higher as more of the workflows shifted online. So we knew that that problem needed to be solved. And so we just focused on product and we built the best product that we could at a pace that was just incredible, where we would code basically all day, all night, launch a feature in the morning, demo it in front of a teacher or an administrator, get their feedback, and then incorporate that feedback into the next release, which was literally 24 hours the following day, and just have that release cadence of hourly or even daily. And we just made so much progress in that early era. And we positioned the product as basically free until I think it was August of 2014. And one day we called up a school district and said, hey, we're running a promotion. If you're willing to make a purchase before August, then we'd be willing to give you a discount. And this was really funny because we didn't really have pricing or discounts like at all. But the school district was like, hey, like we love your product. And it turns out that we're in our budgeting period right now. And so we can definitely do something. And they were able to make a purchase on something that didn't even exist back in, I think, June 2014. And so it was through that conversation we realized that, hey, we could actually charge for this thing. And then we continued to get more and more systematic about it. But really, all of it was based on having really solid product market fit. And that, I think, was a product of just really, really fast-paced iteration that we had back in the day.
Yeah, that's amazing pace of iteration. So I think that's a great story. How much was your first deal for?
Man, I don't even remember. It was like single digit thousands of dollars. I think it was a school district in Hawaii that was our very, very first paying
That's
customer.
awesome.
It was
You
an
don't have like
amazing
the
time.
picture of the check or anything like that from the first customer, or the invoice or anything. They kind of got the ball rolling, nothing like that.
I wish I kept like all of these things, but things were just like going so crazy at the time. It was on to the next thing, on to the next thing. And
Yeah.
in a huge part, like I feel like it's just been a 10-year sprint or so for us. So
Yeah.
it's been wild.
Stuff moves fast. Okay. So I love that story. I love that journey. And I'm going to ask you a couple follow-up questions. One is, right, we have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to the show. And, there's, I would say, barriers that make it exponentially easier to start a business now than when you had to do that, at least from a technical capability in terms of resources needed. Now, there's some things that are harder too, right? I'm sure in terms of attention and other areas. However, like if you were to knowing everything that you know now, right, going from 0 to 100 million, and someone who's listening right now wants to create a business, let's say specifically in the tech area, obviously with AI component included in there, what advice would you give them, in terms of like starting a business, focusing on product, creating product market fit? How would you kind of approach that?
I think the first thing to talk about would be it's important to have the right team, the right co-founding team. And in particular, it's important to have product experience, both on the engineering side as well as on the product side, on that co-founding team. And what I mean by that is if you have that right team, you should be able to firsthand build and market and sell a software product from scratch just with the co-founding team. And I think that that's critical as opposed to, let's say, not having technical or product experience and therefore being sort of obligated to outsource that out to a consulting firm or something like that. That's, I think, a pretty tragic pitfall because if you don't know as a team like how complicated something would be to build, then you're either going to overestimate or underestimate complexity, and both of them are bad, right? Overestimating complexity would mean imagining something is actually really complicated when it's actually very straightforward, or the inverse as well is obviously really, really bad. Whereas if you have the right team, you can judge that for yourself and not just judge it, but actually execute on it and build something. I think the next thing that I talk about is, I think particularly in Silicon Valley, what's really, really glamorized is this idea of raising a ton of money from institutional investors like VCs and so on. And it's almost like the fundraise, the VC fundraise is viewed as an end in itself where people really glamorize it. And I think that that's actually a tragic mistake and really something that's wrong in the culture. I think people should by default think about building particularly software businesses that have no real upfront capital requirements whatsoever besides your time as a founder. People should think about those as bootstrapped by default and perhaps bootstrapped into perpetuity. And if you think about it from a cultural perspective, like nobody really thinks about businesses in those terms. It's kind of unglamorous to think about a fully bootstrapped software business that's sort of growing modestly or slowly. But I think if you are actually able to accomplish that, you can build it in ways that really you want to as the founder and direct it wherever you're interested or passionate in and do it your own way and so on, as opposed to as soon as you raise VC money, things are sort of structured in a way where you might be more or less obligated to raise in a short time horizon just because you've ramped up your burn with the expectation of driving growth. And you're sort of fully beholden to the investor community's definition of growth or profitability and so on. And that can really, really snowball. And so when we started the company, we thought about raising VC money as like, this is like the crown achievement that you might have as a founding team. You finally raised a Series A or something like that. But in retrospect, real ironically, honestly, we actually didn't end up spending $1 of the money that we actually raised because we had such a cash generative business. And
Really?
had we known that, I think we could have saved ourselves pretty significantly. So I just wish that in the culture, we could really change the idea of starting bootstrap software businesses by default. Like that should be the way that everybody approaches this.
You know what? Like, and I'm in the Midwest. I think that's more common in the Midwest than in obviously Silicon Valley, right? Because there's so many investors there, and it's just so culturally ingrained that I think
Yep.
that's hard to escape there, right? At least this is just my experience from interviewing hundreds of founders, and it seems like the bootstrap founders are never in Silicon Valley or San Francisco. You know what I mean? I don't know why, but that's always the way it seems. So I think that's really sage advice that you gave right there, and it's counterintuitive with what most people hear because they're so brainwashed to think, "Hey, you got to do this," right? So I love that. So let's shift gears a little bit now, and you can't use what you just gave me, but what would you say? I'm going to ask you two more questions. What would you say is the single biggest mistake you made along the way that no one wish you know now you wouldn't go that route outside of the funding aspect you just told me?
That's a good question. I think maybe I wouldn't characterize this as a one single mistake, but I would probably talk about it in terms of my own psychology or mentality and the degree to which I sort of had this narrative about myself that was like a self-limiting narrative, both about myself or the company or everything that we were doing. And I think that this is characteristic of most, if not every single person. We kind of impose these limitations around our capability that we just assume are given, but in reality are just entirely imagined. I kind of liken this to like a glass ceiling where you just say, okay, that's the limit. I can't possibly go past that limit. And I just remember the various glass ceilings that I had for myself at various stages in my career. And it was really through self-awareness and self-reflection that I realized that like that glass ceiling only exists in my head. And I feel like I've blown through that glass ceiling over and over and over again. And so I think if there's a mistake there, it would be the mistake of limiting yourself in terms of ambition or capability. And I think the process of really developing more self-awareness of your own fear or insecurity or your own tendencies, especially to the extent they're shaped by your society, your family, your community, your childhood experiences. All of these things sort of impinge a set of constraints on you. And so developing an understanding of that, self-awareness of that, I think allows you to pretty reliably break through those limitations. And I don't think that there's a fundamental limit whatsoever for anybody.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. And that's like maturity to like internalize that. 'Cause I went through a similar phase too, where it's just like you get molded into thinking things are supposed to be a certain way or only can be this way, and half the time it's because you don't know. Part of the time it's because you've never done it before, right? So there's a lot of like, I guess, at least for me, things swirling around in my head where I've experienced that before. So I think that's very good perspective. Okay, so last but not least, kind of moving forward, what do you see as the biggest opportunity in business moving forward right now, specifically where we stand as of May of 2024?
This is such an interesting question. I think I like to answer this question by actually looking backwards and look at, let's say, the last 10, 20, let's say 30 years, right? And think about in 2024, like what are the most like largest companies, most exciting companies, right? Many, if not most of them, did not exist 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? And that's really, really interesting because I think as humans, we kind of think about economic opportunity, business opportunity as this sort of fixed or finite pie, and everybody's sort of grasping at this pie. But to the extent that the best and biggest businesses of today literally did not exist in relatively recent past, to me implies that as we expand the horizon to the future over the next 10, 20, 30 years, the most valuable companies 30 years from now literally don't exist today. And that's because the markets and the services and the products and the technology that's actually going to enable that company to exist like hasn't yet manifested. And so rather than view the world as this sort of fixed pie that everybody's sort of out competing each other with, I think it's much more interesting to imagine the world of possibility that has yet to manifest entirely. And in that, I think that there seems to be a near unlimited amount of opportunity. And I think one way to think about that opportunity is how can you provide value to people? And if you really ask that question, like how do I provide value to people, and really ask that in the context of the most value and the most people, especially as technology is starting to evolve. Like in our last conversation, we talked about AI and AI workflows. AI has yet to be like we don't even understand what it is, let alone how to apply it in a way that actually provides maximum value to people in all verticals and all industries. And so as you sort of ask the question of how do I provide value, to me, it seems like there's an unlimited amount of value to be provided. So I'm a significant optimist, as you may say, about the future of business and business potential. There's not even close to a finite pie that we're competing with.
That's a really good perspective, man. That's refreshing. I think that's cool. You definitely are an optimist. That's very good. You're not cutthroat in that nature by any means. So that's cool. That's cool. I appreciate that. So I think that's a good way to wrap because we are up on time. Where can people find you? Where can they find more about you? And then we'll wrap it up, man.
Check us out on GoGuardian.com, and you can also shoot me an email or add me on LinkedIn. My name is Advait Shinde.
Advait, it was awesome having you on, man. Again, for part 2. Loved your journey, loved your perspective, and appreciate you being on, man.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much, Ryan.
All right. And we will see you all on the next episode.